What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to do a primary oil pump rebuild slash water pump rebuild for this PTO housing. This is a Seadoo 300 motor, so we got all the different miscellaneous parts we need here to do this job. So I'll go through them one by one. This is a tool to remove the impeller for the water pump. These pins go inside of these holes and makes life a lot easier. Take it off. We got this tool, which is a tool for setting the water pump seal. There, it sets the proper depth on it. We have our oil pressure regulator with all the pieces, springs, and everything. The kit also comes with a new O-ring for this. We have our oil seal, which separates the water side of things to the oil pump side of things. We have our new water pump gasket for the housing on the outside. And then finally we have our rotor for the oil pump. That's the inner rotor. We have the outer rotor. We have a new plate cover. And finally we have a new filter. And I'll hold all these up so you have part numbers if you want them. They come in a kit. That's your cover. That's your O-ring. That's your water pump seal. This is your filter. This is your oil seal. This is your outer rotor. The inner rotor does not have part number on it. And then here's your gasket for the water pump housing. So the first steps that we need to do are make sure that this housing is all clean. Took it apart, put it in the parts washer, cleaned everything up. Got everything apart. We have our bolts, we got our housing. That's all cleaned, ready to go. And the first thing we really need to do is we need to check clearances to make sure these clearances are correct, and then we can proceed to rebuilding this. So the first thing we're going to want to check is our radial clearance between the rotor. So the first thing we're going to have to do is I usually prop this up so that the shaft has a place to hang, because otherwise you're going to be into wherever it's setting on. It makes it a little more difficult. You're going to put in your rotor, inner rotor. This is your outer rotor. I'm going to put these in. I always line the marks up the way they come apart. So you have these little dots. Make sure that rotor and inner rotor are both facing the same way. Okay. Usually I put the inner rotor in first and then follow through putting on this one. So now what you're going to want to check is your service limit is 0.25 millimeter. That's 0.0098 in inches. So I have one that's a little bit smaller than the max limit. And what I'm going to do is all the points where this rotor touches in this housing, you're going to want to check and make sure that you can't get a feeler gauge through here. You're going to want to spin it over a couple times and check all the different spots. And you want to make sure that essentially you're within the specs of the service manual. So this one seems pretty good. It's a brand new rotor. Everything lined up. You should not be able to get it into any of the points of contact. So this one's good. So now that we've confirmed that this is good, we're going to move on to checking the axial clearance. So there's a couple of ways to check the clearance between your pump housing and the outer rotor in here to here in relation. You could use a dial indicator if you have a nice solid surface to mount it to. Really not necessary, but if that's one way you want to go about doing it, you can do it. The method I kind of like doing is I like to take a dial caliper, and then what I do is I measure this rotor, which is 15.97, okay? And then what I'll use is the end here and drop it into this housing to figure out what depth is. So we're at right around 1602, 1603. Now in the book, our max clearance right here is 0.004 inches or 0.1 millimeter. So if you do the math and you take the 1603 and you minus the 1597, we're at a 0.06 millimeter, and our max is 0.1, so we're within clearance. Now keep in mind, like the other video I put up on the secondary oil pump, the one in the front of the motor, make sure you buy a pretty good kit, oil pump kit. This one's from WSM. I've had pretty good luck with them. There are a lot of no-name companies out there, and there's a lot of kind of not great companies out there where I've had problems where when this rotor is installed and this plate outer cover is fully seated, that clearance is incorrect and this is all bound up. So before you do anything, before you put the water pump seal in and the oil pump seal and everything, do a dry run and tighten this thing down with everything in here and make sure that the oil pump still spins freely, because if it doesn't, it could be one of them cheap Chinese kits, or they could even be made in America, I don't know, just quality control wise, and this will bind up. You can kind of do a dry run, you could feel that there's a little, this is recessed a tiny bit, but what you're going to do is you're going to put this on and you're going to bolt it on. You're going to make sure this thing still spins. Just like that. A little cocked here. But that's the other thing. You got to make sure you're fully seated, because you have these dowel pins. And the dowel pins line everything up. So that's fully seated and this thing still spins. Here's your holes for your dowel pins and your 2 dowel pins. So now that we got all the clearances and everything checked, the first thing we're going to do is, we got the shaft in here, we're going to put our oil seal in. Let me let that out of here. So let me show you the oil seal. Here's your oil seal. We'll pull this out. There is a certain way it goes in. Anytime you have a lip seal like this, you want, wherever the oil pressure is, you want the void side towards it. So that's going to go in just like that, okay? Now keep in mind, I had a friend ski of mine, he bought a ski from somebody, the motor had blown up and it was brought to the dealership and they put a new motor in, and I presume that since it was under warranty they rebuilt the oil pumps, because obviously they were probably trashed from all the oil going through, the debris going through the oil pumps, and they made the mistake of forgetting to put the seal in. We chased an oil leak for quite some time. Until we finally said, you know, forget about it, let's pull this motor apart and see what's wrong. And we could never find where the leak was, and I want to show everybody this. On the side of this housing, there's a weep hole, okay? And this weep hole is here for a reason. Weep hole's here for 2 reasons, okay? This side, this weep hole side is the oil side. So if you have a oil get into the seal, what it does is it returns it back up to the filter. Okay, so that's fine. But now you have another weep hole. Now this weep hole serves 2 purposes. If this oil seal blows out, it's going to dump oil out the side of this housing, not into your coolant. And the same thing goes if your coolant seal goes bad and the sealant gets in the housing between these 2 seals, it's going to dump coolant out of this weep hole. So they had forgotten to put this seal in. So this thing would run and it would just go through oil, and there was always oil in the bottom of the hull. So what was the hull? So what was happening was oil was getting past the shaft, as usual. There's going to be a little oil, that's why there's a return, and it was dumping out of this weep hole over and over and over until we finally said, let's pull this motor out, and took everything apart and noticed that they missed this seal. So always make sure the seal's in here, make sure it's in here the right way. And if you happen to have random oil leak into your hull that you search and search and search and can't find, and it's not the rear seal, and it's not the PTO housing, it's not the plugs on the bottom of the block, it's potentially either the seal blew out or someone else rebuilt it and never put it back in. So there's your weep hole, and you can see right through. Alright, so let's get started with the rebuild. So the first thing I like to do is, this seal can sometimes be a pain putting on over this once it's in the housing. So what I like to do is, first step is, you're going to take this rotor, we're going to put it in here, but first what we're going to do is, we're going to lubricate the shaft, just so nothing's dry. We're going to lubricate this, and we're going to lubricate this face. Everything else we can lubricate afterwards. Okay, so we got this all lubed up, and we got the shaft all lubed up. Okay, so going to take this, we're going to install it in here. Okay, all right, so we got that in. Now, next part is I put the seal in. Okay, remember, side with the spring goes down. Any pressure side is on this side. This is your outer, so that's going to go in just like that. So now what we do is, I like to put it over the shaft and spin it a little bit to get it so that the seal's not tearing or anything. Okay, so that's ready to go. And then what you can do is, you can usually use some sort of blunt object and just kind of push it in here. Okay, it's going to be a little bit snug, but it's not super snug. Okay, the problem is a lot of guys try and install this before they put the shaft in and then press the outer in, and then sometimes what happens is when you put this together, since there's a gap between the two, sometimes it pushes the oil seal out. So you're just going to make sure this thing's seated all the way in here. Okay, and that's that. Okay, so now the next step's going to be, we're going to install the water pump seal. Okay, so we got the water pump seal, and this is where our special tool comes in handy. Okay, so as you can see, with this thing seated in here, there's a gap, and the reason for the gap is you always want to have a little preload on these, and the preload is spec'd in the book, but to do it by hand is just kind of impossible, because you want to have a little movement in here. So you see, when you hold this up and you push this down, that's your preload amount. Okay, now this tool you can purchase from online. I forget where I got this from. This might be an SBT one or something like that, but they have, let me see if there's part number on here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so there it is, your ceramic push tool. Okay, that's part number. It's a WSM one. So this is machined in proper manner so that you have proper preload. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, this seal's obviously going to go over the shaft here, and we're going to have to push it in. There's two ways to do it. You can either use a vise, if you're careful, or you can use a press. I'm going to use press, and we will go over to the press, and I'll show you how to do that. Alright, so here we are over by the press. I got my pump rotor in. I got my oil seal in the proper way. And now we're going to install this. So what we're going to do first is put this on here. I have my tool that's going to set up in my press, just like this. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to hold this upside down. I'm going to line up our seal, and then we are going to press this in. Just like that. Now we should be pretty pressed in here. I'm gonna release this. We remove this from our tool. As you can see, our seal is now in, and we can check to see if there's still some play in here. And there's our play. May be hard to see on the video, but I can feel it. You can see it. And that's the preload required. Alright, so now that we got our pump seal installed and we have our proper play, it's very hard to see, but trust me, there's preload. And it's set properly. So I've done this a million times. It's just hard to see. I can feel it. We are going to get our rotor installed and get our plate installed. cover. Just to add a note, when you are installing the seal, there's a reason why you want to use a press or a vise or something like that. If you use a hammer, this is actually ceramic in here, and if you hammer this on, you could crack the ceramic and then it will obviously leak. So you want to use a slow pressing process rather than a blunt hammer force. So the first thing we're going to want to do is install this outer rotor. What I like to do is get some oil in this housing where it's going to ride along, just so there's no dry starts. Okay, we're going to put the dots facing down. So we're going to put a little oil on this side and in here. Okay. Oh, also on the outside, can't forget that. And then I like to just kind of spread everything out, just so nothing's dry. And then we're going to install it with the dot down. Okay. There we go. So that's in. Next step's going to be installing this plate. Again, just put a little bit of oil on the shaft where it rides and the surface where it spins, and I also like to put a little bit on the shaft, spin it around, make sure everything's lubricated. Same thing here, make sure our shaft is lubricated, or the bushing shaft. I mean, it's not really bushing, it's just kind of aluminum housing, but okay. And then we are going to place that on there, and we are going to get our bolts and install them. So as per the book, we are going to do 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. All the old manuals were always 89 inch-pounds, so that's kind of what I continue to do. And obviously that's the max for this, 80 plus 9, 89 inch-pounds. So I do 89, keep consistency. This is how the old manuals were for the longest time. They were 89, so I don't know why it changed recently, but it's still within the range. So, and you're also going to put Loctite 243, sorry. And you are going to put a little bit in each hole and a tiny bit on each bolt, and then we'll tighten it down. Now that we got this cover plate on with the Loctite, oil, and everything in here, this is kind of the moment of truth. It spins free. So the problem is, what a lot of people do with these things is they will put them in a press and they'll press them too hard. So here's one of the issues and why people have problems with these. They install them wrong, essentially. So this looks like it's one piece, but it's actually two pieces. This rotor is pinned on the shaft, and here you have the gear and a shoulder. What happens is people press too hard when they're putting that seal on. What they do is they slide this shaft through this gear a little bit, and then what happens is this shoulder protrudes and it binds up on the case, and you'll notice that this gear is not actually sitting flush in the case. It actually has a little gap on it. And that means that somebody overdid this. They put way too much pressure on this when they were putting it together. It doesn't require a ton of pressure. So what happened was this thing slid off, and this center part of the machine shaft is pushing on the housing inside. So always keep an eye on that. if this thing binds up 99%, 95% of the time, it's that, or you got shitty gears that were not the right width. But usually what I like to do is I measure this with the dial caliper, like so. I'll take this and I'll measure it off the old one, and then I'll compare it to the new one when I put it back together and make sure everything's identical. So next step's going to be putting on the impeller, and we'll move on to that. So our next step is to install the impeller. This has left-hand threads. It only gets tightened to 27 inch-pounds because as this spins, it self-tightens essentially. That's why it has left-hand threads. I don't have a torque wrench that goes that low, but it's basically snug. You kind of just use 2 wrenches and it's more than adequate. It doesn't call for Loctite, but I like to put a little bit on just in case. Don't drop it. Another way you can tell if you installed this incorrectly is the fact that this will bottom out, which is not good. If it bottoms out, then you know that the shaft's too deep, this thing's moved, not good. Okay, so you got that on there. We're gonna install our tool. Okay, tool's in. And then what I'm gonna do is use an adjustable wrench to just kind of hold this one. And then I use another adjustable wrench to just tighten this one on. Again, it's 27 inch-pounds. It's like next to nothing. And you're just gonna make sure it's on, bottomed out. And that's it. That's all you need. Okay? So now that that's done, next step's gonna be install the oil pressure regulator, and that will pretty much be it for this. So here we got our oil pressure regulator all cleaned up. First step's going to be installing this O-ring on here, okay? So first we're gonna start off by putting all the pieces in. We're gonna make sure there's oil on all of them. Okay. This first one goes in. And the next one is gonna be this one. Again, we'll oil it up. Okay, that goes in. Okay, next is going to be our 2 springs on this model. Okay, and then finally we're going to install this. This we're going to put Loctite on as per the manual, and we're going to tighten it down to 115 inch-pounds plus or minus 9 inch-pounds. So we got our Loctite on our plug, and this is going to go next. I like to put a little oil around the O-ring just so it seats good. Now you're going to install it like this. I usually push down, you get a thread or 2 in. Okay. And now we'll torque this down. So we got our plug in, made sure the O-ring didn't catch and it's seated. And the final step is going to be torquing it. This is a 10 mil. And that's it. So pretty much covers everything. Again, at the end you want to just make sure everything spins free, no issues, and that's pretty much it for oil pump rebuild. I'll add some notes in here about where is it. This is kind of the same scenario as the other oil pump I did. Sometimes these aftermarket ones don't want to fit. We'll see how this one fits. If it doesn't, I end up using the original one. And this one fits pretty good. So we'll use it. It's not bowed, not bent or anything like that. So that's a plus. Obviously I'm not going to cover anything putting on the PTO gasket or any of that stuff, or putting on the housing. But again, it's all the same. It's 80 inch-pounds plus or minus 9. Put all these guys on. And this is really part of when you're installing it onto the motor. I may show that in a future video, but that's pretty straightforward. So if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Again, if you have any sort of things you want me to look at, please leave that in the comments below. If you guys can, please like and subscribe. You know, I'd like to build a video channel up here and get some more videos out there. They're a little bit time consuming, but you know, if people want to see things, and I'm working on them at the time, then I will try and make videos and put them up. Thank you guys so much. Like and subscribe, and have a great night.